On this video, I would like to record a lesson in inductive Greek grammar from the New Testament in the Gospel of John, beginning in verse 1 and going through the prologue of John. We may do this in two parts. We'll see how things go. But you will need a Greek New Testament, and I will go slowly and pronounce the words, and then we'll look at each word grammatically. And my hope is that maybe some will begin Greek. Once you learn the alphabet, you can begin studying the text inductively. And those of you that have had Greek, we would invite you to join us. One will simply need a Greek New Testament and a dictionary. And I would recommend Gresham Machen, his grammar. I really started with that years ago on the New Testament Greek, and maybe reading that in addition to what we are doing. I would also like to do more in Hebrew. There is a number of works out that we have done in Hebrew in PDF, but now we're doing more and more in audio video. Some of the Psalms, for example, like Psalm 22, we're working on that. We've done Isaiah 53 and so forth. And so I want to start now in John 1. I'm a retired seminary professor. I've taught Greek and Hebrew for many years. And so I just want to pass on a knowledge of the language. And I'm deeply committed to two things. I'm deeply committed to inductive learning of languages and to the Word of God, the Scriptures in the original languages around Jesus Christ. And so we begin in verse 1, in arche ein halagas. And one of the things I would advise is to read along with me. It's important to pronounce the Greek and Hebrew out loud. And then we'll look at the grammar, and then we'll also talk about the meaning of the text, because I truly believe that exegesis is the outflow of grammatical study. So we'll do a both and, a built-in inductive, I could call it Christological Greek grammar. So we begin in verse 1, and I'll just be reading the Greek New Testament and working through the words with you as you're following me from my own Greek New Testament. It begins, in arche ein halagas. Kai halagas ein pras tan thean. Kai theas ein halagas. Notice, in the beginning was the Word. And the Word was face to face with God. And the Word was God, or divine. It's also important to learn vocabulary. And so I have written a grammar. You can find it on Google Books under my name, Dr. Gary Stats, where I have written a brief grammar where we look at these words individually as well. But here, we're just going to go through each word now, and after pronouncing it, we'll look at the grammar. Notice it begins, in arche. In is a preposition. It takes the dative case here, and so we begin with in the beginning. Arche is what we call a first declension noun, and it basically is also in the dative. And one of the ways to tell the dative here is that it has an eta with the iota subscript, and that iota subscript is giving it away as being in the dative case. So in arche, and by the way, your first declension noun here would be declined like this: arche, arches, arche, arcane, archai, archon, archais, archas. So what you have in Greek are what we call declensions, where actually it would fall out from the genitive, but then go down from nominative, genitive, dative, and then accusative. By the way, nominative is your subject. Genitive is looking at possession, like the book of John. I'm simplifying it as much as I can. And then your dative is your indirect object. He gave the ball to someone. and then your accusative is your direct object. He hit the ball. And in Greek, you have all of those with different endings in both the singular and the plural. And so you have first declension nouns and second and so forth. This is what we call a first declension noun, which normally ends in an eta or an alpha. So in the beginning was the Word. Ein is what we would call an imperfect third masculine singular from the root eimi, and it means to be. And it's looking at continuous existence in the past time. And by the way, when you look at the imperfect, you have the verb eimi. It's amen, ace, ein, amen, eta, ason, and so forth. So here, what we have is a third person singular imperfect from the verb eimi. So in the beginning was cha lagos, was the Word. Cha, by the way, is the definite article. And one of the things that you can do when you're beginning Greek or learning it is learn how to decline the article. The article is a giveaway as to how to decline the nouns. For example, cha is the, and if you were going to decline it according to nominative, genitive, dative, accusative, it would be cha, tu, to, ton, hoi, ton, tois, tus. That would be your masculine, what we would call. So, and then there's a feminine, he, tes, te, tain, chai, ton, tais, tas. Then there's a neuter, cha, tu, to, cha, and then a plural, cha, with an alpha, ton, tois, or ta, I should say, ton, tois, ta. But at any rate, so we go ta for the neuter. Let me just do it one more time. Ta, tu, to, ta. That's with the omicron. And then ta with an alpha would be ta, ton, tois, ta. For the nominative plural. But once you might look at Machen or any other grammar and learn the declension of the article, and that will put you in good stead for understanding how to decline a noun. So then we have, in the beginning was halagos, the Word. Ha is the nominative here, masculine singular, and logos is the noun meaning word. And again, it's what we call a second declension noun with the omicron. So it would be lagos, lagu, lago, lagon, lagoi, lagon, lagois, lagus, and so forth. So basically, we would read it, in the beginning was the Word. And by the way, the word here that John is referring to is Jesus Christ. And we know that when we go to verse 14, because the Word became flesh and pitched his tent among us, cup-tented as it were among us. So in the beginning was the Word. And then we go to the second clause, kai halagos ein pros ton theon. And the Word was literally toward God. And I would personally translate this something like face to face with God. Notice again, we have ha lagos, the definite article in ha, lagos, the second declension noun with your omicron. So we have another nominative and nominative singular. And the word was, here again, we have the verb, the imperfect indicative active third person singular from eimi again. So the word was, and pros is a preposition that takes what we call the accusative case. And notice, ton theon is your accusative. It's the object of the preposition pros. So the word was face or toward God, face to face with God. And notice we're seeing here an accusative. We talked about how to decline the article, cha, tu, to, ton. And so here we have an accusative singular in ton. So the Word was with God, or I'm going to translate it something like toward or face to face with God. I should say face to face with God would be a good way to render it in my thinking. And again, theon is your accusative singular, second declension noun, going back to theos, meaning God. And then the third clause, kai theos ein ha logos. That is, and the Word was divine, or the Word was God. Notice theos here is also in the nominative, and it is called a predicate nominative. Now, by that we mean you have the subject of the clause in ha logos, you have the verb in ein, which again is your imperfect indicative active, third person singular from me. We always go back to the present when we are parsing or identifying a verb. Ha, again, is your nominative singular, ha logos. That is, the Word was, and we can translate this, the Word was God, or the Word was divine. It's what we call a predicate nominative, and by that we mean it's looking at the subject is the Word, and it's predicating something about the Word, and it's showing the equality, that is, Christ is equal with God, but he's fully divine, and yet he is distinct from God. In other words, he's the second person of the Blessed Trinity. It is interesting when we go to 1 John, for example, we have the phrase, God is love. And that's an important point that we need to make. Love is in the predicate nominative there. We would not translate that God is a love, but God is love, has the full quality of love. And the same thing is here in the same case. We would never translate this, the Word was a God, but the Word was divine, fully God. And so grammatically, it's important to understand then that a predicate nominative is saying something about the subject of the clause, which is God, or the Word, showing that the Word is fully equal with God, meaning fully divine. By the way, had the article appeared before theos, without the article, it would have really, I believe, destroyed the idea of Trinity. It would have been kai ha theos ein ha logos, and it would go against everything that John's saying, that the Word is face to face with God, distinct from God the Father, and yet he wants to say is fully divine. And so to say that in a predicate nominative kind of a construction with the verb to be, he did not put the article. Otherwise, we would have had exact identity. And the Word is distinct from the Father and yet co-equal with God the Father. So when we look at this phrase, we learn three things. First of all, the Word is eternal. In the beginning, and we're going back to Genesis 1, Bereshit bara Elohim, and so forth. In the beginning, God created the heaven and the earth. And by the way, in the Septuagint, it begins in arche, just like here. And so in the beginning was always existing the Word. And the Word is referring to Jesus Christ. It is significant as we go back to Genesis 1 and what is called a Jewish Targum, Yerushalmi. It reads something like this. In the beginning, God created the heaven and the earth. And the Word said, and the word there is the Aramaic word memra. And it's significant that what the Aramaic Targum was saying is that God and the memra are one and the same. And so I believe personally that John is referring back to that idea, the Jewish idea from the Targum, that Jesus is fully divine. And many try to relate logos to the Greek kind of background, more like a indefinite kind of reason. But I think really John, being Jewish, is going back to the Jewish background of Memra. And so the Memra clearly in the Targum, Yerushalmi, is equal, totally, it's the same. I mean, God creates, the word says, God, the word, they're used interchangeably, the Memra. So I believe John's readers would have picked up the idea here that Jesus is fully divine, fully equal with God the Father. So in the beginning, he was existing. We're looking at his eternality. Secondly, the Word was face to face with God. We're looking at his distinction from the Father in personhood, and yet he is co-equal. So we have face to face from all eternity, and yet we're told the Word was divine. In other words, he's also fully God, fully divine. So we have three great statements here. We have the statement showing the eternality of the Logos, of the Word, of the Memra, of Jesus. Secondly, we're looking at his, can I say, individual personhood within the Godhead. And here we have a wonderful teaching of the Trinity, the two persons of the Godhead in this text. That is, the Word was face to face with God, so he was distinct, and yet he's God, he's fully God. And the Word was divine. And what a beautiful beginning point here. And I've often pointed out to students that the word aim is seen here 3 times. And if we're looking at John in terms of, can we say, 1:1 to 1:18, we have another verb that is brought in verse 3, and that is agenita. That is all things. Panta di autou agenita. All things had a beginning. And here we have the verb genomai. We'll talk about that a little bit later. But that verb genomai means to become. But here, God, or John is telling us that the word Jesus didn't have a becoming or a beginning. He is, and he was. In other words, he is eternal, co-eternal. So here we have the first aim, followed by the first agenita. Then we have the second, that is, the Word was face to face with God. And then we have the second agenita, contrasting that in verse 6. Agenita anthropos apostomenos para theou. That is, a man came to be, having been sent from God. So John, unlike Jesus, was not eternally face to face with God the Father, but Jesus was. And so there's that contrast. And then we have a third contrast. The third aim is the word was divine. And in verse 14, kai chalaga sarx agenita. That is, the word who was fully divine became sarx, became man, and pitched his tent among us. We could say pup tented among us. So what a contrast here that I believe John is making from a literary point of view, starting with the 3 aims, contrasting it with the 3 agenitas in verse 3, verse 6, and verse 14, showing us that Jesus is eternal. All things are not. All things had a beginning through him. Showing us that Jesus was always face to face with the Father. John was not. John had a beginning. And thirdly, showing us that Jesus, who was fully divine, fully God, co-equal in his deity with the Father, then agenita became flesh and took upon human nature as the sinless God-man. So what a beautiful, can I say, literary way that I believe John is beginning his wonderful gospel in this prologue. As we move on to verse 2, in the Greek, it reads, Hutas ein in arche pras tan thaan. And I would encourage you to pronounce it after me to practice your pronunciation. That is, this one was in the beginning face to face with God. Hutas is a demonstrative pronoun, nominative singular, and it means this one. It's important in the Jewish world of the early rabbis. They understood Moses, or I should say the Torah being existence with God, and it was in the sense that it was in his mind. But what he's really saying here is this one was face to face with God. He's the final Torah, I believe John is saying. And the Torah came into being through Moses, John will say later. So I think he's making a point here. This one, by focusing on the demonstrative pronoun in hutas, which is masculine nominative singular. So this one, ein, here we have that imperfect indicative active again, third person singular from eimi. This one was in arche, again we have a repeat, in the beginning, in taking the dative again, and arche, the dative case. So this one was in the beginning, pras tan thaan, a repeat of the same phrase that we saw in verse 1, face to face with God. So John is stressing it was this one that was face to face with God from all eternity. In other words, he is, I think John's saying, the final Torah. He's the one. The rabbis often said that God looked into the Torah and determined how he would create the world. But what's exciting here, I think John, who is a Jewish disciple of Jesus, is saying it was this one who is the final eternal Torah that brought all things into being. So I think John is making that stress here, even by the way he focuses on hutas, the demonstrative pronoun. But then as we move to verse 3, it reads, Panta di autu agenata, kai kuris autu agenata udechen ha geganin. In other words, all things through him, agenata, came to be, had a beginning, unlike the Lord, Jesus, who is eternal. And without him came to be not one thing which has come to be. Notice panta is an adjective meaning all from if we were going to decline it, pas, pantas, panti, panta, and then it would be pantes, pantone, passing, panta. So this is a nominative neuter, we could say. Actually, I decline the masculine, but the neuter would have been pan, pantas, and so forth. So this is a neuter plural, and it's nominative plural. So all things di autu, through him. Notice di is from the preposition dia, and the alpha has alighted here, and we have that little elision mark showing us that, and it takes the genitive case. So all things through him. And notice autu is your personal pronoun. In Greek, you have autos, autu, auto, auton, autoi, auton, autois, autus. And so this, again, is your genitive. That omicron, upsilon, is showing a genitive case, and dia actually takes the genitive. So all things through him, agenata. Notice agenata, by the way, is a deponent verb, what we call a deponent verb. It's middle and passive in form, but active in meaning. It's from genomai. And agenata is your aorist indicative middle, third person singular from genomai. So all things through him had a beginning, came to be. And without him, kai is just your conjunction. Chorus is your preposition, again, that takes the genitive case. of the personal pronoun autou. So without him, agenita, here we have it again, your aorist indicative middle, third person singular from ginomai. So without him came to be not one thing, ud hen. And by the way, hen is a neuter, and we have the word one, and here it's in the neuter, hen, henas, and so forth. Without him came to be not one thing. It's an accusative, a singular, from ches, meaning one, in the neuter here. So without him came to be not even one thing. Ha, here we have the relative pronoun, which geganin, has come to be. So not one thing came to be without him, which has come to be. By the way, geganin is again from the root genomai. It's a perfect indicative active third person singular from genomai. And notice it's almost we could call it a second perfect. If you think of the perfect, when you think of luo, for example, we have leluka, lelukas, leluket. Well, you have reduplication, the le under luo. And I was trained in the Machen and Danon Manti and some of those grammars, but it's interesting here. It is a perfect, and we memorized those, can I say, conjugations years ago. And so geganen is a perfect indicative active third person singular from genomai. So not one thing came into being, which has come into being. That reduplication helps give it away, but it is really a difficult verb because it's not your regular with your kappa, like leluka, your kappa alpha ending. But at any rate, so what he's really saying here is that Jesus is the agent of creation, the eternal God-man. It was through him that all things came to be. So John is rejecting the idea of the eternality of matter. He's also, I think, saying, as a Jewish teacher following Jesus, that Jesus was the agent of creation. It was not necessarily that the Lord looked into the Torah to create, but actually Jesus was the agent of creation, which takes us back again to the word. God said, Yehi or, let there be light. And Vayomer Elohim, God said in the Hebrew. And so here we have the Memra, the Logos, speaking all things into being. Jesus is the agent of creation. And then as we go on in verse 4, in auto zoe ein, that is, in him was life, kai zoe ein tafos ton anthropon, and the life was the light of men. Notice in auto. In again takes the dative case here, in him. By the way, grammarians sometimes speak of a dative of location, and we could see that here, I believe, that is in him. And notice the dative, you can see the dative here with the omega, with the little iota subscript underneath, and the circumflex accent over the omega. So in him, that is in Christ, zoe ein, was life. Zoe is a nominative singular feminine. You think of, again, zoe, zoes, zoe, zoein, and so forth. So it's your nominative singular. In him, life was. And ein again is your, and by the way, zoe is another first declension noun, like arche. Notice the eta, giving it away as a first declension, feminine by that. First declension is feminine. So in him was life. And that ain again is what we saw in verse 1, imperfect, indicative, active, third person singular from emi. So in him was life, kai zoe ein tafos ton anthropon. And the life, notice again, we have the definite article in he zoe. And remember, as we had said in verse 1, if you learn the article, you'll learn the declensions. And this is a feminine definite article, masculine singular. And the feminine article has the eta. It would go he, tes, te, tain, chai, ton, tais, tas, and so forth. So, and the life, nominative singular here, feminine singular, first declension, noun, and the life, and zoe is a noun again that means life. So in him, and it's nominative, the life was, here we have that imperfect indicative active again, third person singular from emi, and the life was the light of men. And notice ta phos. Again, we have a predicate, a nominative. The life was the light. And by the way, phos is what we call a third declension noun. And that ta is neuter. Remember, again, if we're looking at the article ta with the omicron, with the tau, and then tu, to, ta. And then in the plural, it's the tau with the alpha, ton, tois, ta. So here, and the life was the light of the men, or of men. Notice tone takes is the genitive plural. Again, hoi ton is the plural declension of the article. So the life was the light of the men, or of men. And anthropon, again, is your genitive masculine plural. The own ending is giving that away. And when we think of the masculine, anthropos, again, anthropos, anthropou, anthropo, anthropon, and then anthropoi, and then anthropon. There we have that own. So the life was the light of men. And I want to make a comment here. In Genesis 1, Yehior, let there be light in the midst of the darkness. What John is saying here, I believe, drawing back to Genesis 1, is that Jesus was the source of life. He is eternal. And all the way through the Gospel of John, Jesus will say, I am the way, the truth, and the life. We're going to see life emphasized over and over again. So in him was life, and the life was the light of men. And by the way, light brings, can I say, changes the darkness and illuminates. And so light can look at illumination, I believe, or truth. So the life, Jesus, is the truth or the light for humankind. And John is making a beautiful statement here. And Jesus reiterates that in the Gospel of John when he talks about himself. I am the light of the world. And so the life was the light or the truth of men, for men. And what a beautiful statement I believe that John is making. And then we go on to verse 5. Kai taphos in te skatia phine, kai he skatia alta u katelevin. That is, the light shines in the darkness, and the darkness did not take it down or mug it, would be a way that a loose translation that I've often given. But notice kai is your conjunction, and ta phos, again, is your third declension noun, and it is actually, it works a little bit differently, as we said in the third declension, phos, photos, photi, phota, and so forth. So what we have here is a neuter, a third declension noun again, and it is the neuter nominative singular. So in the light, notice in the darkness shines. In te skatia. In is taking the dative case again, and te is your feminine definite article. Notice it's in the dative case with the little iota subscript again under the eta. And so the life or the light in the darkness, skatia, is a first declension noun meaning darkness. Skatia, skartia. And that little iota subscript again is indicative of the dative case. So the light shines in the darkness. Now, phine means to shine. And when you think of, let's say, the conjugation of luo, and I go back to luo, many grammarians go back to luo. Machen's, I started with Machen, teethed on him, luo, lues, lue, luamin, luete, luusi. And so it's a good thing to review that conjugation and using luo as a model. And I've done that in my grammar that can be found on Google Books under my name, Dr. Gary Stats. It would be actually a PDF under Google Books. So, and also dealing with John 1:1-18. So the light in the darkness is shining. Present indicative active, third person singular from phino. So the light continues to shine in the darkness. And I think John is looking at the resurrection. The darkness could not obliterate the light, could not put it out. Speaking of Jesus and his resurrection and his glorious resurrection, having been glorified with the Father as he had prayed in John 17. So the light in the darkness keeps on shining. And the darkness did not take it down. And here again we have cheskatia, the feminine article in the nominative case, and skatia again is a first declension noun in the nominative case. And the darkness, it, here we have an accusative, a neuter from altas. So the light did not take it down. U is your negative particle. And notice katelavin is from katalambano. And it means to, it can, really, I think, can have a double meaning. It means to comprehend and to take down. And John's fond of double meanings. I pointed one out in that, for example, where he talks about using the verb hupsao, like in John 3. As Moses lifted up the serpent in the desert, so must the Son of Man, hupsothenai, be lifted up from hupsao. A double meaning, lifted up in resurrection, lifted up in glory, in the ascension. And lifted up in the way that he is to be preached. So I believe here we have a double meaning. That is, the darkness did not comprehend it, couldn't understand it, but at the same time could not take it down, could not mug it, could not destroy it. A death could not defeat Jesus. He rose again. He conquered death. And I believe there is a contrast here in the two tenses. Phine, the light continues to shine in the darkness, and the darkness, here we have the aorist indicative active, what we call the second aorist indicative active from katalambano. That is, the darkness did not take it down or mug it. Years ago, when I was working on my master's and PhD, I at times had to go in a place where it was scary. And I thought, man, I could be mugged or something. Because it wasn't the safest area. And I think that's the meaning here. In other words, basically the light, the darkness could not snuff out the light. And my mind goes back to Genesis 1, where in the darkness, God speaks, Yehi or, let there be light. And interestingly enough, I think John is thinking of that text and Jesus as the Word, as the Memra again, who speaks in the midst of the darkness. Except here, when I'm looking at the Gospel of John, I'm thinking that John is speaking of his glorious resurrection. That death could not distinguish or could not extinguish the light, and it continues to shine. And that's why Jesus is the light of the world, and why I believe it's so important that ministers preach Christ as the true light. If one believes in him, we are able to move from darkness into that light. What I'd like to do is continue recording. We could call this part 1, looking at inductive Greek grammar from the New Testament, using John as the model because of its great Christological teaching in John 1:1 to 18.